Hi, I'm Duggan, and welcome to the Lightroom Viewfinder. In this movie, I'll continue my exploration of the Lightroom-Photoshop connection. In Part 1, I showed you the different scenarios that arise when you use Lightroom to bring a raw file into Photoshop, save it back to your Lightroom catalog, and then make further edits to the layered Photoshop file. In this follow-up, I'll take a look at the differences in this process when you're working with JPEG files. With a JPEG file, choosing to edit in Photoshop immediately brings up the Edit Photo Options dialog. With the first choice, the result is the same as if you were working with a raw file. The image is opened into Photoshop with any Lightroom Develop adjustments applied. So in this example, I have a JPEG from my iPhone of the famous cathedral in Reykjavik. I've added a texture layer with the blending mode set to Vivid Light and lowered the opacity of that layer to about 80%. I'll choose File, Save, and then close the file. When I return to Lightroom, you can see that the edited file has been added to my Lightroom catalog, and it's in the same folder as the original image. With the second and third choices in the Edit Photo dialog, what happens to the file when you save it after making your edits in Photoshop depends on the format that the file is being saved in. Let's take a look. So I'll choose another iPhone image, this time of a sculpture along the Reykjavik waterfront. I've already applied some Lightroom adjustments to this, and if I go to the Develop module and show the before and after view, you can see the difference from the original image. Next, I'll use the shortcut of Command-E on a Mac or Control-E on Windows, and then select the second option. Edit a copy, and Lightroom adjustments will not be visible. Now before I do anything in Photoshop, let's go back to Lightroom for a second, because I want you to see that the copy file has already been created and added to the catalog. You can see that it's a JPEG file and that the file name has been changed to show a -M on the end. The -M stands for Master Image, and it's my own way of naming files that I bring into Photoshop. The addition of this notation to the file name is something that I've set up in the Lightroom External Editing Preferences. Okay, back in Photoshop, I'll just do something quick and obvious. I'll make a selection, and I'll fill it with black. Next, I'll choose File, Save. Now before I continue, let me just stress that in most cases I don't recommend an editing process where changes such as this are applied directly to the image. Different workflows may have different requirements, of course, but most of the time I prefer to apply my changes in Photoshop non-destructively using layers and save the file in a format that supports that type of editing. We'll take a look at that shortly. So I saved the file, and if we check back in Lightroom, we can see that the copy-m file has now been updated with the changes that I just made. Let's go through this process again, only this time I'll use layers to keep my edits non-destructive. I'm going to use the same original image, and I'll choose the Edit a Copy option. And once again, if we check back in Lightroom, we can see that the JPEG copy file has already been created. This time I'll add a hue saturation adjustment layer in Photoshop, and I'll just radically shift the hues to make it look very different from the original so that we can tell them apart back in Lightroom. So now when I choose File, Save, I get the Save As dialog. The reason that I have to save the file as a copy here is because the JPEG format does not support layers. You can also see that the file is being saved back to the same folder where the original is. But when I return to Lightroom, unlike the previous examples, the file that I just modified in Photoshop has not been added to my Lightroom catalog. So where is it? Well, I know from the Save As dialog that it was saved in the same folder as these other images. The problem is that since it was saved as a copy in Photoshop, using a different name and in a different file format, it becomes a totally different file, and Lightroom has no record of it in the catalog database yet. So to add it to the catalog, I'll go over to the folder list here and right-click on the folder and choose Synchronized folder. By the way, that choice is also available in the Library menu. In the Synchronized folder dialog, I can see that there is one file in this folder that is not currently part of the catalog. So I'll choose to import that, and in this case I'll uncheck the option to show the import dialog. Lightroom will now import the modified layered file and add it to the catalog. Now just to explain why we're only seeing this one image here, when Lightroom imports files, it changes the focus of what is displayed in the center section to show only the previous import. So to return back to the folder where this image is stored, I'll right-click on the thumbnail and choose Go to Folder in Library. And now you can see that the shocking green version is visible in the same folder as the original file. Also there is the copy JPEG file that Lightroom originally created when I initiated the second trip into Photoshop for this image. This file is serving no purpose and I don't need it, so I'll just select the thumbnail and press the delete key on the keyboard and choose to delete the file from the hard drive. Okay, let's use a different file to explore the third option. I'll select this image of the Icelandic horse, and I'll use the shortcut of Command E on a Mac or Control E on Windows, and then choose to edit the original file. Just as with the previous example, if I apply edits directly to the JPEG file and save it, those changes will be updated to the file in the Lightroom catalog. The problem with this approach, however, is that since it is the original file, it means I have irreversibly altered that original file, which is not something I'd recommend. If you do apply edits non-destructively using layers in Photoshop, you'll get the Save As dialog when you go to save the file. And then you'll have to go through the process I showed earlier of synchronizing the folder to add the image back into the Lightroom catalog. So that's a rundown on some of the differences in how Lightroom handles JPEG files that you choose to bring into Photoshop for additional editing. If you're new to this process, I encourage you to watch part 1 of this video because it goes into more detail exploring further options and the different scenarios that arise when you want to reopen those layered files into Photoshop. I'm Sean Duggan, and thanks for watching the Lightroom Viewfinder. You can find more tips and techniques, as well as musings on photography, digital imaging, and the creative process over at my website, SeanDuggan.com.